All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this evening. My name is Kelsey Rettke. I'm editor of the Daily Chronicle. I'm here with our candidates for DeKalb County State's Attorney. We have Anna Wilhelmi, who is our Democrat candidate, and then we have Rick Amato, who is our incumbent and Republican candidate. Maybe we could sort of start off, Rick and Anna, with just if you guys introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, why you're running this year. Maybe we'll start with Anna.
Okay. All right. Hi, Kelsey. Thank you for having me. My name is Anna Wilhelmi, and I am running for state's attorney. So I've been practicing law since 1996, and I have a strong criminal law background. And I also have a sociology background. My bachelor's degree was in sociology with an emphasis in criminology. I went to NIU, and I also went to NIU College of Law. So I graduated from there in 1996. So I chose to run, I was asked to run for this office, and I've never ran for office before. So I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And then I was like, well, gosh, I'm like all over criminal justice reform issues, you know? And so, I mean, this is like my thing. And I thought, well, I'm qualified. You know, I have a strong criminal law background. And you know, you look at the criteria for state's attorney as far as what the duties are, right? They prosecute crimes. They go anywhere from traffic all the way up to murders, right? They do domestic violence, aggravated batteries, home invasions, you know, things like that. You know, they represent the county board, and they also do child support and things like that. So I've touched upon most of these areas, you know, as far as my career, right? So, and then, I was thinking about it, it was about 30 days in, and Elijah Cummings, our congressman, he passed away. And he said, in one of his speeches before he died, he said, what did we do in 2019 to keep our democracy intact? You know, and his words really resonated with me. And he changed my mind. And I said, what did I do? You know, so I decided to run for state's attorney. So here I am.
I'm happy to have you here, Anna.
Thank you.
And you, Rick?
Good evening, Kelsey. Thank you for having us. My name is Rick Amato. I'm the DeKalb County State's Attorney. Prior to becoming state's attorney, I practiced out of my private law office from about 2005 until the election. My wife and I, Renee, live in Sycamore. Actually, tomorrow will be our 15th wedding anniversary. We have 2 kids, and in several weeks, we'll be expecting our 3rd child. We'll find out when it gets here whether it's a boy or a girl. I'm very excited about that. And my background really is varied. When I came to DeKalb first as a student at NIU in 1992, as a marketing major, I graduated in 1996, and I didn't expect to be back. Between graduating my undergrad, I was in sales, and I decided to go back to school to become a lawyer. Through my time as working through law school, I decided that I wanted to become a prosecutor. And so back in 2003, DeKalb County had an opening, and I applied. And little did I know that I would just be getting a job. I found the rest of my life here in DeKalb County. I met my wife, Renee. She's a local Cortland girl, 4th generation DeKalb County family. And we've just built a life since then. So in fact, even my wife had worked at the state's attorney's office. We did not date while we were in the office. I'd left the office, got into private practice, and we started dating. And then we got married also in 2005. At the same time, I was opening my law practice in Sycamore. My law practice went through the counties that touched all of the areas around DeKalb. So up to Rockford, Belvedere, McHenry, Kendall. We had several offices, and I had 8 attorneys working with me, as well as about 4 or 5 support staff. And we focused on criminal law. We focused on criminal defense. And I was here in Sycamore House over that time period, and my heart and practice really was based out of Sycamore. So I had a very good handle on our county. And back in 2016, when I decided to run, there was a lot of strife. Not that dissimilar to what we have right now. And I knew I wanted to serve. I wanted to do more. I had a very young family, and I started looking through their eyes. What is it that this county is going to be like for them? We have family, we have friends. I've throughout the county, and you want to make it a better place. And so with that, I chose to run for state's attorney in 2016 with the guise of I want to make the state's attorney's office one that our community is proud of, but also one that our county respects. And through our first 4 years, I believe we've done that. We've done that through working very hard to develop a team of very talented attorneys that would match their background to the type of criminal needs that we have right now. We have some very serious cases that occur. Sometimes they're happening way too often, and we needed to have the talent to be able to address those. And additionally, we developed a lot of programs that were around our lower level cases and wanted to work on helping those get out of our criminal justice system and not come back. So we've blended between the two of those in these first 4 years and had programs such as our felony review program, our felony diversion program, our Stacia Hollins Head Veterans program, the whole program that we run with the DeKalb Police Department. And as we look into the second term, we need more time. We need more time to continue working these programs that we have and having the effect that we have had over the last several years. As we go forward into the second term, we're looking a lot at domestic violence because that is our county's #1 problem when it comes to criminal cases. Every day, sometimes multiple a day, we're having them on bond call. That means probably on a given week, we're having between 5 and 15 domestic violence cases a week. Inside those domestic violence cases, there's children. So always children are absorbing. They're absorbing that abuse, they're absorbing that trauma. And we need to continue to build programs to serve our victims. We need to develop programs to work with our children that are facing this trauma to help build them through hope. We also will continue to build and focus our assets towards major crime that's occurring in our area. And lastly, we have a strong interest in continuing the programs that we have and look to new programs to change people's behavior. Work with people's behavior so that in a generation, we decrease. Every day we work to decrease and get people out of our criminal justice system. Thank you.
And that's a great lead into my first question, Rick, which is, in your opinion, what is the most pressing issue before the state's attorney's office, and how should we deal with that?
As I mentioned, domestic violence is our county's largest criminal problem. And these cases that come into our court are just the ones that there was actually a battery. But we also have cases that are violating orders of protection. We also have cases that deal with stalking behavior, and those behaviors can be very lethal. And many of our other crimes are set up through domestic violence cases. We've had recent homicides that were based off that. We've had other cases where there's extreme abuse to the victim. A lot of times it's the mother, times that there's abuse to the children. So we need to get a handle on that. I'm working to develop a countywide protocol and policy for that, for domestic violence, so our officers are all on the same page. I would be remiss to say that at this time, especially during most of 2020, we need to make sure we are building an office continually with law enforcement and our community that the community trusts, respects, and is proud of, that they know justice will happen.
And Anna, same question. What's the most pressing issue for the office in your opinion, and how do we deal with it?
I think the most pressing issue in the state's attorney's office is the fact that we have a systemic problem with race, right? So it's not just the state's attorney's office. It's law enforcement, it's the judicial system, okay? There's data that support that, okay? It's present, like in every study, okay? Specifically in IDOT, we've got, when the police use their discretion, okay, to stop people and arrest people, they're using their discretion at least 3 to 1 that they're going to stop Black people versus white people. And the studies also show that the contraband is still the same percentage. So there's innocent people being pulled over and innocent people being subject to dog sniffs and searches, consent searches or not, okay? So we've got that data, and it relates back to what Rick was saying about domestic violence, okay? So when you have a situation where innocent people are being subject to unjust behavior by the criminal justice system, they do not trust the system, okay? So when people do not trust the system, then they do not report, okay? So I am sure that we have an issue with domestic violence and stalking and everything else. but I'm also sure that it is underreported, okay, especially among people of color, okay? And so it all relates back to the trust that you build with law enforcement when they use their discretion. So you have a situation where the police are delegitimizing the justice system right from the get-go, okay? And then we have to deal with it in the state's attorney's office, okay? And we can't ignore those numbers. We have to pay attention to them because it hurts our community. It delegitimizes the police, and we need them. We need them for violent crimes, okay? So we have to address that issue first and foremost. The fact that there is lethal force being used on people for non-lethal issues is a big deal, okay? And even though we are a small county and it's happened, once maybe, right? Like at least once, right? It's such a big impact on the community that it still resonates loudly with our people. So the distrust is still there. So we have to hold the police accountable for illegal actions, okay? So we have to look at that data, and we also have to use the state's attorney's power to document what's happening when people come in and they are charged, right? So demographically, we don't have documentation in in the state's attorney's office, okay, that shows and says, well, demographically, this is what's happening. This is why the courtroom is 40% Black people, right? Or 50% Black people, or whatever it is, because there's not a trail so that professionals can come in and study that data and then help us, because we all want to do the right thing, right? For everyone. So that is my most pressing issue, and it relates to the domestic violence. It relates to stalking, because people women underreport, right? Let alone women, Black women, other women of color, Indigenous women, okay? So it does not help when we have this disparate impact of what are supposed to be colorblind laws.
And that leads me to my next question, Anna. I know this is a topic that you've actually touched on a little bit, either in interviews at marches over the summer. I've seen you at a couple county board meetings, or like the race conversations that the county board held. What is your position on the cash bail system? And in your opinion, when is cash bail necessary? And when should a person's signature be sufficient in order to have them released from jail?
So cash bail is discriminatory on its face, okay? And I know that our current state's attorney is kind of touching on this, but there's other means, right, to make sure that someone comes to court, because the purpose of bail is to make sure that they show up, right? They show up for court, and if bail is denied, it's because of a safety reason, okay? So those are the two issues. So if a person cannot afford bail, right, if they're in for a lower level crime, okay, and they can't afford $500 to get out, even one day, they lose their job. They could lose their housing with the charge. They could lose, their family can, abandon them. All kinds of bad things happen because someone is poor. On the flip side, you can have someone who is charged with something that may end up being a pretty heinous crime, and pay, like, say, for example, ripping off senior citizens, or doing something pretty bad, and they get to spend $30,000, 10% bond of $300,000 bail to get out, and they happily do that, and then they're out on the street, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't make anybody safe, in order to have cash bail. So that's my position. So if someone is going to come to court, right, and they're not a safety issue, right, and they don't have, there's not like some reason why that we're going to think that they're not going to come to court, we would look at that, because there's always a paper trail with that, right, from previous incidents. Then we should give them a signature and have them come to court. So that's my position.
And you, Rick?
Bail reform's been worked on in DeKalb County since late 2015. Judge Stuckert, our presiding judge, was appointed by the Supreme Court to commission bond reform study. And since that time, since 2016, DeKalb County's invested a lot of resources into pretrial release. We have several pretrial release officers, pretrial services officers, and a system that really works to get the screening done of our defendants. Anybody charged with a crime is presumed innocent. Bond is used to ensure there are appearance at court, and well, you need to keep the community safe as well as our victims safe. And so routinely, and bond reports have been done now in our county for the last 4 years. These bond reports do a scoring system. They rank the person's risk to reoffend as well as risk to show up at court. It's a neutral system. In fact, the pretrial services office have ran a statistic study to make sure that there is no implicit bias in how our bonds are being placed. Our office, as a state's attorney, you have to be concerned with community safety. You must be concerned with the safety of our victim and their dependents. So it's a natural tension that our office has when it comes to bonds. Accurately reporting, we do not have people being held on low-level offenses. You look through our jail roster, and those that are in our jail are there for major offenses. And our recognizance release rate is extremely high. The cases that are there, and I've gone through and looked at the history of our jail population. And our jail population is an average daily jail population of 100. 100 people in our jail in Sycamore. And that is the lowest level of anybody, or any incarceration level since 2005. That's a combination of our bond reform working. That's also in combination with our felony review system working, that as we review cases alongside law enforcement for charges for felonies. Felonies are the most serious cases in the system. We make sure the evidence is accurate. We make sure that the evidence is going to be admissible. We make sure that what they're asking for is correct. We make sure that we are getting services to the victim from the moment things happen. Accurately speaking, too, the stops are not 3-to-1 of color to 1 white person or Caucasian person being stopped. You need to be accurate with that. That would be misleading to the public to say that 3 times it's within the race population that is higher. It's not the total amount of stops. Our office, as a state's attorney, you review these cases as they come in. So you need to be accurate with what's happening. You need to make sure that the evidence is collecting is good and that the charges are good. Alongside bond reform, we don't have issues in jail of people being housed there and waiting unless it's a very serious case. Our office has moved towards a format where we file motions to deny bail, and those are our most serious offenses. To do that, we need to show that the presumption of guilt is great and that there is a strong likelihood of danger to the community. And there's a hearing that we need to put on in front of the judge. And we've done that quite a bit because we know the seriousness of some of these offenses. And you can't ensure the community safety, the victim safety, unless you do these steps. So again, it's a natural balance between, yes, presumption of guilt is, they're presumed innocent. They're not presumed guilty at all. And then you need to balance that with the community safety. And I think our court system, especially with the judges' commitment to bond reform, we are in very good shape locally on how our cases and how more than fair our bonds are for our defendants.
You mentioned earlier about, oh, go ahead, Anna.
I'm sorry, could I please respond?
Sure.
So the IDOT data from 2017 says exactly what I stated. So the population, it's based on the city of DeKalb, okay? And you can look that up on the traffic study from 2017, and you can go through each department and actually see what the percentages are between the population and the percentage of stops based on race.
Just if I may, I have the 2019 stats in front of me. The stops of, and this is a small issue, but just so people aren't misled of what happens, the percent of stops of white drivers is 1,776. Black or African American is 1,403. Hispanic or Latino are 468. Just so people aren't thinking that the numbers, yes, it's on the population, but those are the actual numbers from the 2019. I did not have the 2017 numbers.
But you have to look at the content of the population based on race. You can't just say that there's this many stops of white people and this many stops of black people. You have to look at the population of race within that study.
Are you talking about the data being relative to the population, right?
Yes.
Okay. On that note too, you know, I think a lot of concern that we've been hearing over the last couple months obviously has to do with equity in terms of race, right? So whether it's in the police or the court system, you know, we've heard about access to, you know, just equal treatment. What, in your opinion, and I'm gonna let Rick answer this one first, what, in your opinion, can or should be done to help low-income and underserved populations receive equal access to the justice system, whether that's, again, you know, educating people on their rights or representation in court, anything like that?
The lower income population is represented through our court system, and it's an effort directive at the Supreme Court level for access to justice. Specifically speaking to criminal offenses, there is a big population of low income that ends up in the criminal justice system. We need a full system review, not just the criminal justice system, of why this is happening. A lot of that becomes generational. A lot of it becomes lack of educational opportunities, lack of employment opportunities, as well as there ends up being criminal behavior. That needs to be looked at. The information needs to be out there. It cannot be held in abeyance of our people. Our people need to know, and they need to know the system works fair and works fair for them. We've had conversations locally about what does that look like? Is somebody of color being treated the same as somebody that's not of color? And there's been 2 studies in the court system that have shown recently on the juvenile level as well as on the bond call that while there is a disparate proportion of entrance of minority versus white into the system. In the juvenile system, the defendant is being treated equally and fairly, as well as our bonds, the bond study that showed to make sure the scoring system that is being offered to every defendant that comes in to our custody, that they are being treated fair and away from racial bias. There needs to be more information studies done. I'm standing behind that. I would like to see those done on our adult cases too, so the community knows the type of effort that's been going on. I've been involved in the legal community out here since 2003, both as a prosecutor, both as an independent practitioner that defended people, as well as now the state's attorney. I have a very good feeling of how our people are treated, and I do think they are treated fairly. Can it improve? It absolutely can improve. But in these 17 years, I've seen fair and equal treatment.
And Anna, same question about what can be done to help low-income and underserved populations receive equal access?
Well, if you're talking about the criminal justice system versus the civil system, I know that there's some issues going on with tenant and landlord right now that is pretty ugly, and people are being treated pretty badly, you know, as far as tenancy, water quality and things like that. I think that depending on what is happening as far as the fact pattern, we have to hold landlords accountable for what they're doing. I do know that it's been tossed about as far as a common lease for landlord-tenant situations, like in DeKalb County, or at least in the city of DeKalb, so that tenants have a more fair playing ground, you know, as far as like a civil situation. I know that except for the state's attorney can certainly step in if the behavior is egregious, right? So I think that the criminal justice system needs to work with other systems. You know, economically, we have certain areas of DeKalb County that are poor. You know, like one of my cohorts said, you know, she said, Anna, she said, you know, where the sidewalk stops, the money stops, you know, and that's a big deal, because if you look at poverty in some way is always related to crime, right? So you see the numbers kind of flowing together. And I'm not saying poverty is the cause of crime. I'm just saying that they flow in numbers together, okay? So you can't ignore that, right? So I think that, you know, I don't think that the solution for children is to put police in schools. I don't think SROs should be in schools. I think that we should invest our money, our taxpayer dollars, in other resources for children, okay? The criminal justice system should be the last stop. And going back to race, Black children, there was a woman, Dr. Evans Winters, who spoke at the Center for Black Studies at NAU, and she focuses on Black girls, okay? And Black girls are way more likely to be arrested in school, okay? Or disciplined in school, or expelled from school, or suspended from school than any other group, right? So why is that? So the criminal justice system should not be in our schools. Money should be in our schools. Money should be dumped in our schools so that we can have the proper resources to educate children, because unless you believe that Black and brown children are inherently criminal, they can benefit from those resources other than the criminal justice system. So my goal would be to keep them out of the system, not anywhere close to the system, if we can help it.
And how would you specifically in the state's attorney's office ensure that they're kept out of the system?
Well, there's different ways that you can do it. You can set up like some sort of community justice program, to where they're not even touching on coming into a court process, right? So if there is a school system that is depending on arresting Black children or Black girls, right, specifically, because that's who I was kind of talking about, because they seem to have a higher arrest rate, that, we focus on going in and seeing what the child needs, and the school has to work with us to do that, So a police officer arresting a child in school is just not the way to go. You've got autistic children. I mean, parents of autistic children, right? That's another underreported situation when a child becomes violent, right? Are they going to call the police for their autistic child having a violent breakdown? They shouldn't be calling the police. They should be calling other resources, right? To help them, And if they did call the police, they have to weigh whether or not the police, in that moment, have enough training or wherewithal to know how to treat an autistic child, right? Without some kind of lethal means or some kind of a bad ending. So I think that, as a community, we need to put resources where they are for the children, in the schools, into the home, into the community, and keep the resources there. So I would try to focus on that.
And let's talk a little more about the policing component of the state's attorney's office. So obviously, you both know, the state's attorney specifically, and also the office works closely with local law enforcement agencies. Another sort of big issue, big topic that we've heard about over the last couple of months from local Black Lives Matter activists is the idea of intervening if something happens, right? So in your opinion, and we'll let Anna answer this first, what is your position on if or when a state's attorney should get involved in matters of police accountability? So whether we're talking about allegations of brutality or misuse of power, or maybe a breaking and use of force policy, how and when would a state's attorney get involved in that?
All the time. The state's attorney's job is to make sure that the police are obeying the law, right? I mean, the police need to obey the law. Excessive use of force is not obeying the law. It's breaking the law, okay? So when you have a situation, and it's very difficult, by the way, and I know Rick knows this as well, is it's very difficult for someone to file a complaint against the police. You know, this is not something that people just willy-nilly do. You know, when someone chooses to file a complaint against a police officer, it's not an easy thing to do. And as a defense attorney, I've known several occasions where, and this was not necessarily in DeKalb County, where people, you know, they went in to file a complaint against an officer for some kind of a brutality, and the officers at the desk say, oh, well, you got to come back when that officer's on duty, right? I mean, there's all kinds of like roadblocks that come up when people go to file complaints against the police, especially in your own mental roadblock, right? As a person who's a victim, you know. So the state's attorney's office definitely has to scrutinize behavior of the police when they are in the wrong, when they are breaking the law. So as far as, you know, excessive use of force, that's the same thing. So I do know that, you know, grand juries, you know, when we have a lethal situation, or what could have been a lethal situation with Alante McDowell, you know, based on the video, right? Someone who passed out based on a chokehold. And I know that there's been some things put in place since then. But the community hurts right now. I mean, the community hurts based on that incident. They are not over that incident. It is something that could have resulted in a death here in DeKalb, little DeKalb County, right? And it is such a big consequence for a human being. Like it's such a big consequence when you have someone who is to protect and serve, use lethal force on someone who we know is unarmed, you know, and not a threat, that it impacts how people behave around the police, you know. So it becomes terrifying to be around police officers as a community member and being Black or Indigenous or someone of color. And of course, the darker, you know, the more likely you are to have an issue, right, with the police. So it becomes traumatizing over and over again until the issue is resolved, you know. And when you don't hold someone accountable for that kind of egregious behavior, I mean, even in domestic violence, right? A domestic violence situation, if somebody chokes, right? A man chokes a woman, right? He should be going down, okay? Because that's lethal. That can be like the end of her. That could cause brain damage, right? Why is this different? It's because it's not different, except that the police are entrusted, you know, they have this trust that they're supposed to have with the community, you know. So if we are treating the domestic violence victims with this, you know, with the fact that if somebody is choked, that this is a really serious offense that we need to take very seriously, because it could end up in a death. We should be treating this other individual the same way as a victim.
All right, Rick, and same question. In your opinion, what is your position on when a state's attorney should get involved, if or when, in matters of police accountability?
Every day. Our office is our number one mission is to ensure justice. And that's what we do. That's why we put in a felony review system, that every time an officer wants a felony, we need to work together to determine that. You need to look at it at every point in turn. This summer, our big four police agencies, that's Northern Illinois University Police Department, DeKalb Police Department, Sycamore Police Department, and the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office, we work together to review the use of force policies. All four of them have now added, in addition to the neck hold or choke hold that stops somebody's airwave, has also banned the use of carotid artery holds that stops the blood flow to and from the brain. Yes, very lethal. If a man chokes his intimate partner, that man is 7,500% more likely to kill that partner. It's extremely lethal. That in Illinois, the law is only the windpipe. So all four of our major police departments have now banned one step further. In addition, they've also put in all their policies a duty to intervene. And that was done with my direction, their direction, together. You review that, and that was put into all 4 of those policies. So duty to intervene would be when some officer on the scene is not comfortable with what another officer is doing to an individual, they must intervene. These situations need to go through the state's attorney. The state's attorney is the elected official, and it is your duty as the elected official to account to the public. That is what needs to be done. The situation that Anna was speaking of as far as the Lonte McDowell matter. Number one, that's a pending litigation matter right now that as the state's attorney, you have to defend the county as well as the sheriff's office, and there's also a suit against the city. But without getting into the facts of that matter, a grand jury was used. A grand jury was used because that was what was left as far as investigation to choose. State police had done an investigation. They did not seek charges. They did not ask for charges. It was not a completed investigation because they failed to reach the victim. Because of conflicts of interest, you must manage those conflicts of interest. Our office took that matter and used a grand jury investigation to complete the investigation. Once given the grand jury, they were made to make their decision based on that information that was gathered through the investigation, as well as the expert report that was commissioned by my office that was used in that matter. The grand jury is our members that find probable cause to bring felonies. They're also members of our community that are sitting on our jury panel to find somebody's guilt or innocence, or guilty or not guilty, at a jury trial. They take their job very seriously, and in that instance, that was what was available to us. Our office has charged at least 2 police officers. We've charged other public officials when the duty comes and when that's needed, and that's the call of the state's attorney. That's the job you're elected to account to the public. When these situations come up, an ethical situation, on a criminal situation, the door needs to be open, and the public needs to know that they get charged, come to their state's attorney for justice.
May I respond?
Sure.
Thank you. So the grand jury, studies show that the grand jury, they'll pretty much indict a ham sandwich, like according to previous case law, right, Rick? Except for police officers, okay? Studies show that police officers are the exception with grand juries, okay? There's another route. So if in fact a state's attorney has a conflict, right? There's another route. If a state's attorney has a conflict and there's a grand jury, there's also an ability to ask for a special prosecutor to be appointed, okay? So that would be another route that a person could go. Because the grand juries are not dependable when it comes to police officers. And in fact, the studies show the opposite. So if a person, the state's attorney, was looking to indict or to charge a police officer, I don't know that a grand jury would be the route to go.
For that special prosecutor, who would pick that?
Let me follow up. The whole indicting a ham sandwich is, it's very inflammatory and I think disrespectful to those that serve on our grand jury, and it's an allegation that is unfounded and a bit unfair under this situation. These people from our community are compelled to serve, and they serve and they take their job very seriously. And whatever jury they are part of, they work very hard. Whether we agree with the result or not, it's not material. That's what they're charged to do. Sorry.
Okay, everyone's allowed to respond. Just follow up for you, Anna, with that special prosecutor, who picks that? And where, like, what pool are they picking from? Would that be a prosecutor within the state's attorney's office, or how does that work?
So you would petition the judge and ask that a special prosecutor to be appointed. I don't know that there's a pool. It's not a usual thing, but certainly there's plenty of private attorneys, or if it was, I'm just not sure, but you could certainly find a fair attorney that could prosecute a case.
Okay.
If I may answer on that, Kelsey. So special prosecutor, yes, it would go to the judge to appoint a special prosecutor. We use special prosecutors in the county right now, depending on the situation. Generally, that goes out to the State's Attorney Association, to the State's Attorney's offices for electing or for somebody to step up to say they'll take the charge. I was appointed special prosecutor in a pending matter now that's in Kankakee County for that reason. And it's done. I caution with what we saw with the state police investigation. If they're not local, they have no skin in the game. They didn't come up with any recommendation that was going to be beneficial to addressing the concerns in our community. I commend our community for their concerns. It shows that this is not acceptable, this is not a usual behavior, and it's alarming to everybody. And that has been from the day that it happened.
So I'm going to take us to a different route now based upon what you guys were talking about in the beginning with domestic violence cases. So, you know, Rick, I think it was you that mentioned that domestic violence cases are one of the big issues in the county. I'm going to let Rick answer this first, right, Anna? Didn't you answer the last one first? So how would you address the domestic violence and abuse cases in the county, especially in regards to repeat offenders? I'm going to add a second component to this question, which is just based on the pandemic and you know, people staying at home or maybe the lack of reporting during this whole crisis. Are we seeing anything that's exacerbating that situation?
First, for a repeat offender, we're working every day and reviewing the bond call. So early on in my tenure, I initiated a process that every victim of domestic violence is called by our office each morning when we receive the bond call. We're reaching out to them to find out what's going on. In addition, this is a byproduct of bond. When somebody's out on bond and they commit a new violation, especially a domestic violence situation, our office will file a motion to revoke bond on that person, and they're held without bond until the cases get resolved. That's an everyday occurrence as far as us reviewing, and it happens far too often that a repeat offender does happen. We work very closely alongside, especially over the last year to 2 years, with the police departments. The sheriff's office has a dedicated investigator that does domestic violence, and she helps us review many cases and get follow-up, as well as the DeKalb Police Department has a domestic violence unit that we work alongside on continued investigations. We need more of it. I'm in the process of rewriting a policy and protocol that everybody countywide would need to follow for domestic violence. That incorporates something called the LAP program. The LAP program is done through Safe Passage, where on a scene of a domestic violence, an officer goes through a scoring sheet, and based on the answers that the victim's giving at the scene, Safe Passage is brought out to serve that victim. In addition, we're adding body cams. The sheriff's office now has deployment of about half their patrol of body cams. Body cams is a great tool when it comes to gathering evidence for domestic violence. Soon, DeKalb Police, soon Sycamore Police, soon NIU will have body cams. The footage is unbelievable because you're seeing live. You're seeing live what's only been written for years and years. Now you're seeing in a vivid format what you may have taken for granted by the written word, how much the fear is real in a victim. You can see the injuries to them. You can see what their reactions are. And you can get help to them, and they're being captured without having to be forced to come into a police station and write a statement. They're not the suspect. They're the victim. And using body cams does aid in that. So in addition to the countywide domestic violence policy, you need to work with the children in these situations. Unfortunately, when the kids are involved and they're absorbing this and learning and they're absorbing the trauma, they're exponentially more likely to be involved with the domestic violence situation, either as an abuser or as a victim. And what happens is this trauma they absorb, it sticks on them. It sticks on them, and it never goes away unless you intervene. And so in addition to what we're doing on the investigation side, you need to reach these children. That's done through a juvenile justice council. That's done through a trauma-informed committee that's part of the juvenile justice council. Part of a grant that I was able to get for the office was our juvenile justice council grant, which will be reforming in a special target because of our work with the trauma-informed community. And that's every service provider we have, whether it's Ben Gordon, Safe Passage, Family Service Agency, Youth Service Bureau, Adventure Works, law enforcement, example of everybody working outside of their silo. We work outside our silos. You break down these silos, you actually get to help and serve our community. And so we would be working towards more projects and outreach towards our children, so we get them at an earlier age, so we can get them in services that we can stop the loss of hope that they have in these traumatic situations. There's a ton of work to do on it. A part that I've been studying at for the last 2 years too is called Family Justice Centers. Family Justice Centers is a concept that is on the East Coast and West Coast. I've toured and spent a decent amount of time in the facility in Fort Worth, Texas. There's no family justice centers in the state of Illinois. Family Justice Center commingles operations from law enforcement, prosecutor's office, Children's Advocacy Center, Family Service Agency, domestic violence counseling, medical counseling, dental help, religious help, help preparing for court, all in a center where the victim comes to, brings their children, comes to it. There's no bar with having to have childcare. There's no bar to just come on in, and the victim receives immediate counseling and all the services come to them. That would be a goal that we would need in our community. Rockford is currently the only community in the state of Illinois building one of these, and they are close to having it. The next closest one's in Milwaukee. Why this concept doesn't exist in Chicago or the suburbs, I don't know, but that's the beauty of a county of our size with the love and care that our community has, that we can work towards that. The work's already there where our service providers are working more alongside. It takes the relationships to work and identify that everybody at that table is important. You know, it's a round table. There's no head, there's no bottom. Everybody there is for the goal of helping our victims, helping our children, and you get those services in place, we'll stop the generational abuse. We'll stop polyvictimization as well. They can be through these terrible times in life and move forward to hope. Thank you.
All right, Anna, and same question to you. How would you advocate, oh no, that's a different one, I'm sorry. How would you address domestic violence and abuse cases in the county, especially in regards to repeat offenders?
Well, I do want to address immigrants here, illegal undocumented immigrants in this county, okay? They need to be able to know that the state's attorney's office is going to abide by the Trust Act, right? And that the sheriff's departments and the other law enforcement are going to do so as well, okay? So I am looking at the underreported potential here. When people do not trust the law enforcement, okay? So if you're going to try and prevent some kind of a serious domestic violence situation, you have to have a victim who reports, okay? So we need to build that trust back within the community so that people feel comfortable, including undocumented immigrants, to call the police, okay? Knowing that they're not going to be subject to any further consequences, okay? So as far as repeat offenders, that's pretty doggone serious, okay? Domestic violence because it's it's like this private, complicated violence and terror of a victim, basically terrorizing a victim, right? Usually a woman. You've got to look at whether or not there's repeat behavior. Now, I know Rick mentioned the lethality assessment, right? And I know that the police officers are using that, but why are we not using, the scene is usually secured by then, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking those questions. Why are we not using a social worker, somebody who is qualified to talk with the victim at that point, asking those questions? Because you're asking her or him, but usually her, about crimes that have been committed by her spouse or significant other in the past, okay? Whether, for example, whether or not that person has strangled her, right? And in that moment, after this event, this person is weighing consequences right then, okay? What's going to happen if I say yes to that question? He strangled me before. You know what I'm saying? So we need someone who's qualified to look at those, to deal with the victim in those moments. And I think the lethality assessment is an excellent assessment by Jacqueline Campbell, and it's very useful. Where it started in emergency rooms and all of that, and down to these situations. But, you know, I think that we need to use the correct professionals in those particular situations so that we can get down to a proper interview process that will elicit the most truth at that moment.
Doesn't, maybe this is what you were referring to, Rick, doesn't Safe Passage do something like that, but it's via phone, right? Like, so the person, the trained person isn't actually on the scene, but they have the ability, I believe law enforcement does, to call Safe Passage on the scene and have them run through that. Is that what you guys are referring to?
Yeah, that's correct. And like our lethality assessment, 80% of our victims are reporting that they've been strangled by that partner previously, no matter what the action was that day. So how it works is the law enforcement officer is asking you questions. Based on a certain score, Safe Passage is called. Safe Passage can come to the scene. They can do a phone call. Depends on.
But the law enforcement officer is asking it, not like a social worker or anything like that.
Correct. When you're on the scene, especially on these cases, it is very dangerous. Many of our homicides to police officers occur from domestic violence situations. It goes hand in hand. It goes towards these lethality scores. It also goes towards the trauma that this child absorbed throughout his life. More trauma, the more likely that they are to become criminally involved. The more likely they, if it's through domestic violence, become domestically violent as an adult. The more likely they grow into cop killers as well as mass killers. That's tied into many of our big shootings that have happened throughout the country, which are just extremely frightening, whether it's a school shooting or the Las Vegas shooting or an airport shooting. They are time and time again, tied into domestically violent folks who have strangled their victim, and they have a history of childhood abuse. So it all builds, getting away from your question, it starts with simple programs like that, where you're reaching the victim, but you have to build that underlayer in for the children to stop these other types of offenses.
All right, and I think we have time for one more question. So this sort of goes back into, I believe both of you talked about this earlier, where we talk about prevention instead of, aftermath stuff. So as a state's attorney, and we'll let Anna answer this first, how would you advocate for mental wellness and drug rehabilitation programs in the justice system, before somebody gets charged?
So there's something, you can defer prosecution, okay? So with mental health, it should not be criminalized, right? Unless there is some violent act attached. And a lot of times with mental health, you have drug issues, okay? So we did this war on drugs, and we basically built this mass incarceration of people based on this war on drugs. And addicts need to be treated as addicts, right? So with medical help, okay? It's certainly cheaper to do that than to incarcerate someone, is to give them the help they need. They can stay within the community that they live and have their family support system. Their family's not torn apart. Their children aren't without a parent. And they can keep their housing, right? There's so many reasons why you should not be, someone who is based upon mental illness should be incarcerated. So there needs to be, and I know they just started a professional on staff. So when someone calls 911 for someone who had a time, so that has to be addressed. And to bring someone into a law enforcement situation where they have minimal mental health training. So like police officers, they have a certain number of hours of mental health training. They have a certain number of hours of other trainings, right? And it's not enough. It's not like a professional mental health worker would have, okay? The same with social work. The hours that people put in for that education is valuable, and we need to use it rather than sending in law enforcement who have been trained on other things, right? So for example, in violent situations, they know how to handle violent situations, you know, and not necessarily want to do social work in their job. And I've heard that many times, that police aren't social workers. Why are they doing that? You know, so I would help guide deferred prosecutions when you have a medical situation versus a criminal situation. You know, I had a case one time, and I'm not going to go into detail too much about it, but it was a case where a person was in the hospital and, you know, was walking out of the hospital with an IV, you know what I'm saying? And the police were called and end up in this big criminal mess. You know, I don't know why that would happen, why you wouldn't treat that as a medical situation. But, you know, you can definitely use prosecutions that are deferred right from the get-go.
And Rick, same question. How would you advocate for mental wellness and drug rehabilitation programs through the justice system?
More and more services, more and more options. For many years, it became okay that our state's largest mental health institutions become jail. Like that is not acceptable. Locally, we have turned the corner. Mental health court opened a couple years ago. When you go in there, you understand, you can see the people, you can see what they're dealing with as their mental illnesses are going on. Law enforcement's in a difficult task because sometimes they're the only ones called. And that is where it's nice to have these teams built in where you have alongside services available, teams that work together. Ben Gordon is working with the DeKalb Police Department. That came out of the necessity of, we kept seeing the same people that, you know, they're not criminally behaving, but their behavior is such where they need services. The Hope Drug Rehabilitation Center, drug rehabilitation programs, another idea that we came up with where people struggling with addictions do not need to be just charged with an offense. That program with DeKalb Police and my office is somebody struggling with addictions come into the police. We have an agreement with our office. You turn in your drugs, we will get you treatment that night. We've had 14 people take advantage of that program. No coercion of charges, absolutely none, with the idea of getting better. We cannot arrest our way out of mental health problems. Our office deals with mental health petitions on a regular basis where families have no other options but to involve the court. People sometimes have no other option but to deal with law enforcement. And law enforcement has to deal with a situation where it's unstable. They have to either bring in the resources they have or try to have that person committed. And it's not a success. We need more services. Time and time again over the history of our state, we've lost services for our mental health. We've lost services for our social services based on funding. And we need to make a commitment locally. And we do have a very strong mental health board, as well as with very strong social services agencies that we continue to work together, that we protect the fundings that we do have to make sure we have that and continue to grow. And you need to start with it here. That's the beauty of our county. We have 405,000 people here. We can make these changes and be an example for other places based on our size. We can make changes quickly that have effect, and we could have the ability to fund things that aren't out there, but we cannot have continued cutting of funding towards these options. We can't just put people in jail with a mental health problem and say that that's fixed. It's very dangerous to do, and it's not the right thing.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our interview this evening, you guys. Thank you so much to Anna and Rick for joining us. We do appreciate it. To all of our readers and viewers who will see this video, just a reminder that the election is November 3rd. Voting does start on September 24th, which will include mail-in ballots. And we thank you for watching. Take care.
Thank you, Kelsey.